Attorney General Pam Bondi is cracking down on suspects allegedly vandalizing Tesla dealerships and vehicles.
So far, the DOJ has charged 3 people who were allegedly involved in these attacks.
Bondi said in a statement Thursday, "The days of committing crimes without consequence have ended. Let this be a warning. If you join this wave of domestic terrorism against Tesla properties, the Department of Justice will put you behind bars." One of the defendants allegedly threw 8 Molotov cocktails at a Tesla dealership in Oregon and was armed with a suppressed AR-15, the DOJ says. Another in Colorado allegedly tried to light Teslas on fire with Molotov cocktails, per the DOJ.
And in South Carolina, a defendant allegedly lit Tesla charging stations on fire, also with Molotov cocktails, and wrote profane anti-Trump messages in the area. Each defendant faces up to 20 years in prison.
Former U.S. Attorney Barbara McQuaid, who was appointed by Obama, commented on the nature of Bondi using the term terrorism, telling the Wall Street Journal, "It is an aggressive use of terminology, likely to send a message of deterrence, but it's not wrong."
The Journal also notes that designating crimes as domestic terrorism gives the DOJ more investigative tools to crack down on those acts.
Vice President J.D. Vance gave an interesting theory during an interview as to who might be behind these alleged attacks.
The other thing I always wonder with this stuff is, this is not cheap, right? Terrorism is not cheap. We saw that in the Middle East 25 years ago. You had some very wealthy financiers of al-Qaeda. My guess is that if we do get to the bottom of this, we're going to find out that there are some very crazy, very deranged, but very wealthy left-wing people who are funding this stuff. And I think that is the most important thing that we have to focus on. It's not the foot soldiers, it's the guy at the top writing the checks.
Great interview there with my colleague Vince Colonnese. Trump posted on Truth Social this morning, "I look forward to watching the sick terrorist thugs get 20-year jail sentences for what they are doing to Elon Musk and Tesla. Perhaps they could serve them in the prisons of El Salvador, which have become so recently famous for such lovely conditions."
Journalist Ken Klippenstein wrote on Substack, "Even if what they did can be argued to meet the dictionary definition of terrorism, its legal application would give the government a frankly terrifying amount of power. Trump is now unleashing the deep state, their deep state, to go after associates and others who support or contemplate similar acts. In other words, to criminalize and then stigmatize opposition." Well, where will we start here, Amber? The term terrorism is one that I tend to be reluctant to use across the board, whether the acts are from left-wing people or right-wing people, because oftentimes the way it's used seems to me to betray the ideological leanings of the person who's using it. There are exceptions to that. I mean, 9/11 was obviously terrorism, right? You just set out to kill as many civilians as you possibly can. Is somebody vandalizing a Tesla charging station domestic terrorism? That seems very overwrought to me. I think it's a criminal offence of vandalism, and that's something that the courts should look into. Rhetoric about terrorism, I tend to be a bit wary of.
I think what pushes this into the terrorism category is the fact that this is clearly becoming an organized way of trying to intimidate Elon Musk and Tesla owners. There was a website that was online for a few days earlier this week that put out the private addresses of Tesla owners with a Molotov cocktail icon if you clicked on it, so that people could go about firebombing or attacking private citizens who just happen to own Teslas. We've seen a lot of people around DC, I'm sure you've seen the same, putting bumper stickers on their Tesla that says, "I bought this before I knew Elon was crazy."
Right.
Saying, "Hey guys, please don't target
Sure.
me." And so to me, the terrorism question is, what is the motivation behind this? And it seems pretty obvious to me that this is a form of political intimidation.
So I think that one of the reasons I'm wary of the label is you can apply it to any act of vandalism or violence against property even that has a political motivation. It is obviously the case here that it does have a political motivation, but do we term every single thing in that respect terrorism? One of the people we mentioned is accused of writing profane anti-Trump slogans on property or of some description. That's, as I say, vandalism. If he's writing anti-Trump things that has a political motive. But do we really think of that as terrorism in the same way as J.D. Vance citing the term, citing references to Al-Qaeda? I mean, it seems if you're going to broaden the category to that extent, you seem to be broadening it to a point of all near meaninglessness to me.
I think it's fair to say it's not the same as Al-Qaeda because they haven't killed 2,000 people, but I don't think that makes it not acceptable for the category. And the broadness of the category could be concerning, but in this case, I think this one is just so obvious to me that it is domestic terrorism. And I know that...
Really, you genuinely think that it is actual domestic terrorism, just like spray paint anti-Trump slogans?
To firebomb Tesla chargers and Teslas in dealerships,
yeah, but
target private owners and the director of the FBI, yeah, absolutely.
Right, but those are acts of violence or acts of threats towards individuals. Do you consider like the vandalization of property to be domestic terrorism?
But it's not about individuals. It's Tesla as a symbol of opposition to Elon Musk and the political policies that he is implementing in government. It's very obviously intended to me. I mean, you have these people celebrating the drop of the Tesla stock prices. You have them putting the FBI director, people who have been critical of government bureaucracy like Mike Benz on this website to target them. And I also, the graffiti is obviously not as disturbing as the firebombing, but to sort of minimize it as just like vandalism against cars, I think misses the broader point of what the intention is. And also, it is dangerous, incredibly dangerous, to set things on fire.
I mean,
not
defending arson.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, these electric vehicles have batteries that blow up. I mean, the cars literally explode when they get set on fire.
Yeah.
We don't know if there are employees in these dealerships when these people are tossing these Molotov cocktails. Are they checking to make sure that the cars are unoccupied? If they set some private individual's car on fire, what happens to their house that's sitting right next to it? I just think it's much more serious than not you specifically, but some of the media has been describing it. I mean, we've had CNN and MSNBC anchors describe it as forms of protest. We've had individuals in the media say that this is a very spirited form of protest, and to me it harkens back to the summer of 2020 when they were describing burning down cities as fiery but mostly peaceful.
You see, I have said I'm not here to defend arson, but I think it's important, like for example, forms of protest. There have been protests outside Tesla showrooms, which is a completely legitimate form of protest. And when it gets into the category of J.D. Vance implying or accusing very wealthy people of being behind this and saying things like terrorism is not cheap. Well, if we're defining getting a spray can and writing profane anti-Trump things on a wall somewhere, it is actually quite cheap. And so I wonder whether his kind of definition is geared to suggest, oh, well, people can't really be organically outraged about what Elon Musk is doing. There must be shadowy forces behind it. Whereas in fact, when you look at what Elon Musk is doing, or you look at some of the rhetoric, even things like feeding USAID into the wood chipper, we could have a whole separate debate about whether it's right or wrong to do that. But there are plainly a lot of people very outraged by what they consider his buying of influence and then his actions within the government in that way.
Yeah, I think it's reasonable to have questions about what J.D. Vance has said and other members of the administration have said about potential organization, formal organization behind this or funding of this. And we've asked the White House about this on two separate occasions, I believe. We asked them in the White House press briefing earlier this week. Our White House correspondent, Reagan Reese, said, do you believe that this is being organized by an outside group, and do you think an outside group is funding it? And are you investigating it that way? And Caroline Leavitt kind of punted on that question. So, I mean, that's something that we definitely want to know from the administration and want to know what the evidence is for that, if that is indeed what they think is happening.
Absolutely, yeah. We'd like to see the evidence. Up next, who would have thought the face of the Democratic resistance would be an 83-year-old? You can probably guess who, but stick with us anyway.